All right, well, welcome to our CCL training program tonight. It's a weekly webinar series of citizens climate lobbies that provides CCL supporters like you and I with access to in-depth training opportunities on topics related to climate change and effective climate advocacy. I'm going to play your host tonight here, Brett Cease. I'm CCL's Vice President of Programs, and we want to start tonight by thanking you for being here for Lobby Lead training. We're going to go into detail about the special role of a lobby meeting leader. The lead we know makes sure that our teams across the country go into our meetings with a plan and with everyone knowing how to work together to ensure a successful outcome. You might be listening to this call tonight or listening in later because you either know that you'll be leading a meeting, or you realize that you might be needed in this role, or maybe because you simply want to keep deepening your understanding of how to lobby. Regardless of where this finds you, we are so glad to have you on this call tonight. Thank you so much for making time. Beyond myself, I know I've already introduced myself. My co-presenter tonight is my dear friend and CCL's liaison program coordinator, as well as the Northwind regional director for CCL, Mindy Aller. Mindy works across the Northwind to support chapter leaders and volunteers doing the incredible work to create a livable world. At the same time, she works with our liaisons across the country in building trusted relationships with their members of Congress. She loves watching our volunteers grow in confidence and abilities, and regularly gets to see this progress as they coach each other during our leadership calls as we all increase our knowledge together. So I can't think of a better co-presenter tonight. Thank you so much for joining as well, Mindy. And if we've done our job well, you're going to walk away with the following three learning goals. Number one, we're going to have the chance to highlight the importance that you play as lobby meeting leads. Number two, we're going to emphasize the value of advanced planning and how you can set that up while providing some helpful recommendations in that thought process. And we're going to demonstrate some of the how-tos in navigating and adapting to potential challenges you might encounter as a leader, just so that you feel prepared and can think ahead on the fly on anything that might emerge with meetings that you're getting ready for. And the agenda tonight to do that is pretty straightforward. We're going to have the chance, first and foremost, to dive into the importance of leads. And really, the big picture is that leading a lobby team, like everything else we do in CCL, is all about building relationships. So in this case, you're working to create good relationships among members of your team and ultimately between your team and the member of Congress you're meeting with or the staff. And as we dive into the nitty-gritty tonight, just please keep in mind this overall importance of building those connections and relationships, and you'll do just fine. That's really the central message. But without further ado, thank you all so much for being here. For those that just tuned in, I'll put a link one last time where you can follow along with our slides. And let's get this party started. So I'll pass it over to you, Mindy.
All right. Thanks, Brett. Leadership is crucial to our lobby meetings. And as you probably know, thoughtful leadership is time consuming because it requires self-reflection as well as getting to know your team. Many of us have had to step out of our comfort zone to be a leader. As administrations and congressional leadership change, we have all adapted our strategies and expanded our knowledge. We hit the ground running with our expanded policy agenda just as the 118th Congress began meeting in 2023. So that agenda that includes carbon pricing, clean energy permitting reform, building electrification and efficiency, and forestry. And all of you, many of you, have demonstrated your leadership with regard to that expanded policy agenda. And for that, we thank you. So let's starting with a little quote too. So here's a good one from Harry Potter. "It's a curious thing, Harry, but perhaps those who are best suited to power are those who have never sought it. Those who, like you, have leadership thrust upon them and take up the mantle because they must, and find, to their own surprise, that they wear it well." We know you have a lot of commitments in your life and probably lots of demands on your time. So thank you for accepting this mantle of leadership, for lifting up others to do great things, and for joining us tonight to learn how to run a CCL lobby meeting so that you can show up on lobby day with your heart open. So may you be delighted by your team's possibilities, and may your member of Congress or their staff leave you tickled by their willingness to help. That's our wish for you.
I love that, Mindy. All right, well, let's jump in here before, talking about some of the basics and just take a quick review of what makes constituent lobbyists so powerful in meetings with our members of Congress. We dive into this much more deeply with kind of some of our more basic lobby trainings, but tonight let's just do a quick review of them to ground ourselves in that confidence and that self-assurance of the importance of showing up as leads. A lot of us feel nervous going into a meeting, and that's totally normal, and I think that's really important to name and normalize for your team. But really, our advantage is that we're constituents. We're not professional lobbyists. So, although we want you to behave professionally, to look professional, you don't have to be a professional lobbyist. This is as true in the United States as it is for our volunteers around the world. And we want you, as you do your meetings, to relax and be yourself. Whatever helps you get into that empowering listening space ahead of your meetings. Personally, I take some deep breaths and remember to take in that space around me as I enter the meeting to have that more presence of mind. I also remind myself and kind of feel grounded and that I'm part of a team of great, capable people. Whatever it is for you to help set up your team in that space, part of what sets CCL apart in the eyes that we've heard from congressional offices is that we are ordinary people that are relatable and bring the stories of why we care deeply about the future of our planet and the impacts on future generations. And as one of our admirers in Congress says repeatedly to his CCL colleagues, these CCL lobbyists are seeking us on their own dime with their own time. So know that as an ordinary human, you or your team might make mistakes too. It's not a big deal. In your lobby meeting, you might wish you or a team member had phrased things differently or said things better. In tonight's training, we're going to show you how to handle situations like this. And again, we're in the relationship building business. So, whatever else, be human and embrace whatever happens.
So most lobby team meetings are short. Some are very short. Some are longer. And it will also vary now that we're doing them on by virtual meetings this time. So regardless of the length of time, how you facilitate the meeting plays an important role. So as a lobby meeting leader facilitating the meeting, you are well positioned to nurture and empower others by showing faith in your team. You can give people roles that might be a stretch for them. This might be a stretch for you. Look for coachable moments as your team members stretch into those new roles. You can empower your team members by putting them into situations where they can both succeed and fail, and welcome that failure and allow them to learn from it. Our collective power means everyone building skills and knowledge. So leadership means allowing others to build skills and confidence. And as a leader, you give others that chance to shine. Our team is only as strong as its weakest players, so help everyone grow. Your work as a leader occurs in the lobby meeting. It also happens during the planning and practicing prior to the lobby meeting. So your leadership shows up in how you reach out to your team in advance of the planning meeting and how you follow up with your team after the lobby meeting. The meeting leader, you, is like the conductor of an orchestra. So the leader manages the lobby meeting but does not dominate it. A leader helps with transition points like moving the conversation from one team member to another or from one agenda item to another. The leader gets the conversation back on track if it strays, and they help wrap up the discussion if someone on the team is taking too long. And the leader closes the meeting. So a leader listens to team members looking for opportunities to have them shine. And if constituents and the liaison are present, the leader also ensures that those people speak. Although the lobby meeting sometimes is the constituent or is the one that has the longest standing relationship with the office. So of course, then the leader speaks in the meeting from that perspective as well. A leader observes the facial and body cues, reads situations, and responds accordingly. In some cases, the member of Congress or staffer might demonstrate their interest in one of your team members in particular. So they might want to learn more about what that volunteer knows about climate change or what their particular experience was. So go with the flow and have that volunteer speak up, possibly more than you originally planned. As a leader, keep in mind our overarching goal for the meeting, as Brett said, which is we want to deepen our relationships with our members of Congress. We want to demonstrate our interest in their perspective, so aim to have the member of Congress or their staff speak at least 50% of the time in your meeting. So you want to speak 50% or less with you and your team. CCL volunteers have been building relationships with members of Congress for more than 15 years. So you're part of a legacy of volunteer leaders who've developed policy savvy, grown their skills, and demonstrated the grassroots support to pass effective bipartisan climate legislation. Many leaders especially enjoy empowering and mentoring young adults. Members of Congress also value young voices. So if possible, involve youth and young adults in your meeting. Find out what expertise they have. You may be surprised. Many of us older adults rely on youth and young adults to help with technology. While it may be true that many young people feel comfortable with modern technology, not every young person wants to be the technical support. So do be sure you ask. Just like adults of any age, youth and young adults bring a wide range of experiences, perspectives, knowledge, and skills. So find out what they bring to the table and make room for them to shine as well. I have watched a fourth grader very effectively make the ask of a member of Congress, and she had his complete attention. And you can bet that he certainly wanted to do what she was asking.
I can imagine. Building on what Mindy shared, one other pro tip we'll kind of throw out here before going into some of our advanced planning considerations is just the importance of bringing a letter from a trusted messenger. Local chapters across the country have been working on bringing letters for our meetings for many years from respected leaders in their community, what we like to call trusted messengers in their district calling for climate action. If you've been up to this or if you haven't, either way, this is an important tool that you can use to share these letters in your meeting, not only to show that trusted voice advocating for climate action, but also to demonstrate our connections and outreach in the district. So you can phrase or kind of find the best strategic place for it to bring up in your meeting that feels most relevant. But the message really implied is that these letters, or we in CCL, are not alone in the meeting calling for the climate action or the specific primary ask. There's somebody else that they might know or respect who also feels the same way that we do, helping amplify and increase the magnitude of our request. Even better is to bring that actual trusted messenger with you, especially in the virtual lobby meeting. In this era, obviously for the fall lobby meetings that we have. So you want to make sure that if you do this, that they're part of your team practice, have a chance to be coached ahead of time by you, so that they're right up to speed about your whole approach. But just again, the importance of those trusted messengers as part of our lobby team effort is always key. All right, so with that though, let's jump into some advanced planning discussion. And really what we mean by this is important considerations to keep in mind as you help your team with advanced planning, the time you take now to plan ahead for your lobby meeting, and how you can use it strategically to empower all of your team in this stage.
So plan a time to meet with your team on Zoom or another video conference to practice before your lobby meeting. So introduce yourself first as the lobby team lead via an email. If you can, you might also want to connect your team via a text string and reference the email you sent, because emails sometimes get buried. So using a text to flag that you just sent an email can be very helpful. Ask in that message what role each team member prefers. It may not be the role you give them, but it helps to know what they like to be doing, and it gets everyone thinking about that before you have your practice meeting. Include a link to the bio for your member of Congress, and Brett will put in the chat where you can find those. And also share links to our basic lobby training in case they may have missed those. So before you meet with your team, you may want to consult with other CCL volunteers about possible items for your meeting plan. You may already be one of these roles I mentioned, but you might also include your group leader, other chapter members, your state coordinator, or your regional director, or the liaison to help with ideas. When you do meet with the lobby team to plan the lobby meeting, we've got a recommended agenda for you to do the planning. And we also have templates that you can use for Republicans and Democrats to get you started on your meeting plan. So when you're there in your practice meeting, first invite everyone to introduce themselves to the rest of the team, and then review the previous meeting notes and let the team know how these minutes influence your lobby meeting. So you should have those in advance. If not, please let us know. So after you've reviewed the meeting notes from previous meetings, share the lobby meeting plan with your team and remind them of the primary and secondary asks that we'll talk about in a little bit. So this fall, we have 2 primary asks for Republican offices and 1 for Democrat offices. And we also have a secondary ask for every office. So you and your team can determine the order of these asks, and you'll determine other things around that topic of the best way to present it. So if you're meeting with a team on Zoom in advance, you can actually share that meeting plan document right on the screen and fill in the details as you go along planning your meeting. So you want to assign roles and explain the responsibility of each role. We'll cover those in the next slide, but you'll want to confirm that everyone understands their role and your role as leader. And then lastly, get the team to brainstorm open-ended questions that relate to the primary and secondary asks. So having a big list to pick from can be a fun way to get started of just sort of brainstorming every question you can think of, and then determine which questions are then most appropriate and who will be the person to ask those questions. So leave enough time in your planning meeting so that you can run through the agenda with a practice meeting. And here's where you can remind the team that as their leader, you'll facilitate transitions verbally. And this is particularly important when you're on a virtual meeting where you can't physically poke someone or kick them under the table. So you need to have your verbal cues ready. Something like, Layla, would like to tell you why we're here today and what we're asking for. So as the leader, you help prompt your team members just in case they've forgotten that it's their turn to speak.
Thank you, Mindy. Well, let's talk a little bit more. We've got 3 slides here, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And the first one is just thinking about what to set in advance, right? So as your team settles into a plan, you feel good about it. We do actually recommend, based on the research that the Congressional Management Foundation has put forth and what offices in Congress prefer, to actually email a very brief overview of your agenda to the office, including the primary ask or the one pager that you plan on reviewing ahead of time. We want to make sure it's brief, just given how busy offices are, and you can always provide more if they ask for it. But just being able to kind of put that out there and highlight the kind of one pager, the list of constituents attended, a brief agenda. Research, again, like we've highlighted, that the Congressional Management Foundation has done, emphasizes that staff in the meeting really appreciate being able to prepare resources and questions and responses ahead of time. This isn't a necessary step that CCL expects all teams to do if you don't have everything settled on ahead of time enough, but know that it's certainly helpful if you have that chance. Let's also talk about a review of our roles. So we have a whole training that just talks about all of the top 10 roles that we have across our meetings. I won't go into all the depth here. I'll in fact actually just put a resource where you can find the lobby team roles in the chat here, and we'll also link to it in the training speaker notes for those listening in later on. We've already talked about the importance of leader. The appreciator is the one who shows appreciation. It can be more than one person for something the member of Congress has recently accomplished. We've got a time monitor helping keep things on track, also monitoring the amount of time roughly between the team and the member of Congress or staff, hoping that it's close to 50-50. We've got the note taker, the team member who takes notes on the discussion, records key points made. We want to make sure that those notes are captured in our action tracker. And if your team has any questions about how to best do that, you can always ask your state coordinator or your regional director. We've got discussion roles and askers. Askers are the main person designated to make that demonstration of CCL's purpose and ask. We'll be reviewing that in just a bit. We've got the deliverer, the person that brings evidence of support from the district, whether that's constituent letters, trusted messengers, postcards, endorsements, you name it, LTEs. That's a wonderful point of evidence, again, to embolden the member and realize that it's not just the people meeting on Zoom or in person that are representative of the views that you're asking. And then we also have people like the photographer who make sure to capture something that we can share on social media afterwards with permission. The follow-up, the person making sure that anything that you agree to in the meeting gets done and coordinated afterwards, including a thank you to the office. And people, if you have extra roles, designated as listeners, making sure that they can lean in or are empowered to ask more or use the opportunity to clarify what's missing in that dialogue. So let's actually talk a little bit about how you can do that, especially as all of us are actually listeners in the meetings that we're in. We all have the chance to really broaden the discussion and lean into having the chance to really practice our open-ended questions. Remember, an open-ended question often starts with any of these journalistic 5 Ws or the how. Who, what, where, when, how. These types of questions invite a deeper answer than a yes or no response. You can avoid why questions simply because asking them might feel accusatory and put your member of Congress or the staffer on the defensive. When we ask open-ended questions, we avoid questions that are simply only there to have a kind of a canned response to. And really, the only time that we do want to have a direct yes or no question is when we're making that ask. So, will you sponsor or help introduce this policy? Or will you work to support more work on permitting reform? Those are our asks. They can differ in that sense from the open-ended questions. But again, we design our open-ended questions to elicit a response that's going to reveal more about what the other person thinks. Some of these might look like, What opportunities or challenges do you see for climate policy in the year ahead? What questions or concerns do you have about our ask? How can we help build political will for action on permitting reform, carbon pricing, you name it, in the district? If you feel stuck at any point in the meeting, or maybe you feel cornered or you're confused by a response, this is a wonderful chance to practice open ended questions. And the best one that you can have in your back pocket, if you remember anything else in the slide, is tell me more about that. It'll continue the conversation and get the other person to expand more about their thinking, redirecting that back to your member of Congress to give them an opportunity to help you understand more clearly what they're trying to convey.
So we have two primary asks for our Republicans and one for Democrats for this round. So we'll be talking about the Energy Permitting Reform Act for both Republicans and Democrats, and then just for Republican offices, we'll be starting to ask them to defend the climate provisions within the Inflation Reduction Act.
Excellent. And I'll dive in a little bit more to a few of the other details behind each of these. But again, this one is for all offices. The second one is for Republican offices. On the actual primary ask, this is again something that we've been engaged with for our June meetings, for our ongoing efforts with our climate action program. Primary ask around this kind of Senate Bill 4753, the Energy Permitting Reform Act of 2024, is for all offices. And the top line message is we want them to support passing the Energy Permitting Reform Act in this Congress and need their leadership to make sure this bill makes it through before the end of the lame duck period or kind of the end of this congressional session. So we won't go into all the details. There's a huge link and reference of what we're talking about in the chat, but this bill essentially accelerates clean energy transmission permitting. It gets more clean energy on federal lands, provides judicial review provisions that shorten statute of limitations to accelerate the deployment of new clean energy. It makes domestic mining more feasible. It makes and moves more oil and gas and renewable lease sales and expedites LNG export terminal permits. So it's got a full range of kind of energy benefits across renewables as well as traditional fossils. We can dive into the nitty gritty if you're interested on this tonight. But again, a lot of the modeling highlights the importance of, even in the most conservative scenarios, this bill helping accelerate the deployment of additional emission reductions. If you're curious, we have a wonderful training that's been a compendium actually of 3 different ones that we've put together throughout the summer and fall, led by Dana and others, our research coordinator. Mindy can put that in the chat as well. The Energy Permitting Reform Act of 2024 FAQs. But basically, top line, especially for you just to kind of review as leaders on messaging for Democrats, we want to make sure to emphasize that renewable energy stands to benefit greatly from permitting reform. I think Dana's direct words are we want to bury fossil fuels under an avalanche of clean energy through the kind of acceleration that this policy can help by providing the best ways to reduce emissions in building clean energy faster. We will not be able to hit our climate goals without transmission expansion. We know that. We know looking at other countries relative to them, the US builds incredibly slow. The average timeline is much longer than in other countries. And we want to lock in climate wins now while we still can in this congressional period by putting steel in the ground. So we're asking leadership on the Democratic side to use all means possible to move this bill now. On the Republican side, I think another key couple of areas to emphasize are making it easier to build all forms of energy infrastructure, using framing to emphasize that transmission build-out will lower costs and improve reliability for electricity for all Americans. We want to make sure to emphasize that, especially for Republican offices, you can't do permitting reform through reconciliation or executive action. So even if your office feels like, oh, we just want to wait now until there's a Republican majority in the House and Senate next session, it's going to still need bipartisan support to really get the same level of energy support that this bill has. It can't be passed exclusively in reconciliation. And we want to make sure to lock in a win for the economy and start lowering those energy costs now. So those are the top line messages on both sides of the aisle. And on the Republican side, like Mindy highlighted, we're also leaning into starting to highlight for our conservative offices the importance of the climate provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. That's the IRA abbreviation there. We want to acknowledge first and foremost, a little backstory again. The Inflation Reduction Act was passed only with Democratic votes. It is seen as Biden's signature achievement. We know that President Trump has railed against it, but we also know a couple of other things just to highlight the importance behind it. Republicans look best when their voters are with their voters when they're cutting spending. We also know there's going to be a need for money next Congress to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or the Trump tax cuts, and that this is a potential revenue source that Republicans will be looking for. And so as a result, what we want to make sure to anticipate kind of heading into next session is priming the pump for Republican offices to emphasize the Inflation Reduction Act, and particularly the climate provisions within it are good for business. And we want to emphasize the importance of keeping it into place. You can see on the right-hand side the overall messaging behind our primary ask here, but the top line kind of messages on the left are, this is broad and simple, and we can build on this conversation by acknowledging that we like the climate. That's not all that we like about this bill. We know that essentially that 80% of the Inflation Reduction Act's money around climate provisions has flowed into red districts. So I think it's really important to kind of highlight some of the economic development opportunities that this primary ask highlights, including manufacturing investment over 89 billion, quadrupling investments over the last 2 years, the number of jobs it's created, and although other impacts, should it be repealed, what it looks like for actual American workers. So those are the two primary asks. The other thing I'll just ask or highlight in our asks real quick before opening up for any other Q&A for leads here is our secondary ask. And so every year, we really want to lead with a main focus, and then if there's time or if that already seems really locked in with your office, we've got a secondary ask. And this year is actually one that's an old friend. We've already had this in years past as well. It's the RISE Act, or the Reinvesting in Shoreline Economies and Ecosystems Act. And this is one actually that, again, even though the kind of title of it implies that it benefits shoreline communities exclusively, there's a lot of benefits for coastal states as well as interior states. And on our secondary ask page, we actually even have a whole handout devoted to inland states that might feel like this isn't as relevant for them. But really, top line messaging around the RISE Act, it's again building out our clean energy economy as well as coastal resilience through funding coastal infrastructure and resilient efforts for vulnerable communities. They provide an update to revenue sharing for federal offshore wind leases within states that are coastal. And part of that is kind of through the amendment process of GOMESA, a fancy acronym for the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, which basically eliminates the cap it's currently at. It makes sure that we have the chance to kind of raise additional funds and protect those revenues from other uses outside of kind of their original purpose. We've been working on this bill for 4 years. This is potentially the last opportunity we have to pass it in this lame duck period. In this last 2 weeks, it actually has just passed the Senate Energy Natural Resources Committee. So it has momentum in its back, and we're really asking for it to be included in any end of the year package. We really have hope and confidence that this is something that we can finally see through after really advocating for it for the last couple of sessions in Congress. And I know some of our key allies, like Senator Whitehouse, have been really excited about this, along with Senator Cassidy for a long time as the lead sponsors. All right, so let's talk about leading a meeting and discussing leadership considerations on the actual day of your meetings, right before, during, and after your lobby meeting. Two times that we really want to jump into, one of which is specifically that pre-meeting huddle. We actually, in the hallways in Congress, if we're doing an in-person meeting, can meet and say designated, hey, we want to meet, 15 minutes ahead of time at Rayburn 2414. You can't do that on Zoom, right? Or you can't do that as easy on Zoom. So we want to make sure to have the chance to have a designated line. Many groups finding having an online pre-huddle meeting ahead of your lobby meeting is key. As you lead, you can enable the waiting room to create a separate meeting space, or even have a different meeting ID if you want. That's a little bit cumbersome then to hop over to another one for your team so that they can meet ahead of the call. And here's some things you want to review during that pre-huddle. Remind everyone to relax, be present, and have fun. Review roles again. Who's going to be the leader? That's you, but who's going to be the appreciator? Who's going to be the one making the main ask? You get the picture there. Review the goals of the meeting. Go over the primary and supporting asks one last time, and make sure to have people articulate it in front of each other so that you have the chance to really kind of feel comfortable in front of people. You get kind of the butterflies out of your stomach. For fall lobbying, we want to make sure everyone is in a place where they don't look distracted by a phone call or apps on their computer. Remind people to kind of mute any notification dings. Everyone's looking good and professional. Their background isn't too cluttered. That's up to you as the meeting lead to just do a quick, like, kind of house inventory of what everyone's kind of status is. And you can ground people again, like we did tonight, in open ended questions. What are some that everyone can have in their back pocket? Maybe everyone's got a different one that they can lean into at different times during the meeting to really be able to have that comfortability and understanding where the member stands on an issue to keep asking. And then lastly, we want to make sure to remind people to watch or listen for cues, really emphasizing handoffs between members or different parts of the meeting so that you can help cue each other. It's a lot harder to do that, online without being actually physically in person. So let's talk about actually what a meeting leader does then during the meeting. And with that, I'll actually pass it to you, Mindy.
Yes. And the pictures we're looking at just reminded me of one thing that we didn't cover earlier, which is also attire. We talk about dressing professionally when people go to in-person meetings in DC, and I think it's also really helpful to encourage your team to dress professionally when you're on Zoom too. It still can give you that same feeling as being in person with a lobby meeting, and shows those you're meeting with that you really take it seriously. So now let's talk a little bit about situational awareness. Um, as a meeting leader, you do a lot of advanced planning and preparation, and some of you have already done a lot of it, and that's really important. But we can't let our plans and preparation go on autopilot or cause us to feel too scripted in the meeting. So we practice ahead of time, but you never know what scenario will play out. So that's why we always need to be focused on what is being said in the moment, and as a team be ready to help each other respond to what we're actually hearing, not what we expect or think we heard or think we're going to hear. So as a meeting leader, you should recognize when it might be appropriate to diverge from your plan, and we refer to this as situational awareness. So it's the ability to perceive and understand what's happening in the moment and being able to react to challenges as they happen. So good situational awareness means you're not only listening to the words being said, but also the tone of voice and body language as much as you can see it when you're on video conference. So one of the benefits of having a team is that if you don't pick up on a particular cue from your member of Congress or their staffer, one of your fellow lobbyists might. So it's important for your team to trust each other, to speak up when they see something. And all team members should be empowered to ask a follow-up question or to redirect a derailed conversation.
I love that. I definitely think that kind of situational awareness is key for everyone and not feeling like you have to be committed to the plan that you made ahead of time, right? Another key phrase that we love emphasizing is that lobbying is a team sport. This is not an individual achievement medal. We want team leaders to empower others to thrive in their role with a lobby meeting. We want them to move forward. One of the ways that we can do this is by taking note throughout the meeting of who isn't being heard if someone is really dominating or being too vocal. So one thing that you can kind of highlight as the lead is if there's a power dynamic going on in your meeting with one individual, or even a group, have been dominating the meeting, even if it's inadvertent, right? We want to make sure that it's our role as leads to have facilitate all voices present having the chance to walk away at the end feeling like they were part of the meeting, they contributed. Another situation to look out for is the silent constituent. And one of the things here with that is just looking about, you know, where you can encourage people to lean in with a verbal cue. It can be something as simple as, Mindy, I'd love to just pause for a moment and see if there's anything you'd like to add to this point. A gentle reminder or a way to kind of cue with your baton the other violas that we haven't heard from for a while. That's your role as the conductor, right? Helping the whole team sing. Let's also talk a little bit about what if all of a sudden somebody freezes up. One of the best stories in CCL lore is Marshall Saunders' recollection of his first lobby meeting, where all of a sudden it became his turn to talk, and he couldn't for the life of him remember the one thing he came into the meeting planning to say. All he could think about were how awkward his shoes looked or where he should put his hands on his knees. And then it took somebody else to cue him and help bring him back in to what that transition was going to look like. So let's practice a couple of transitions out loud. We encourage you to practice them with your team to help feel natural ahead of time. If somebody says something flat out wrong on the meeting, rather than correcting them, you can say something like, if I may, let me add to what Mindy is saying. Your team will appreciate them for not feeling overly corrected or pointing out that they forgot something. Or let's just say a CCL volunteer gets agitated or angry during a meeting. This is not common. It has happened, but be prepared for it by staying calm. Here's how it could play out. I'll play the role of the angry volunteer. Mindy will be the team leader. It's you guys in Congress who are stalling and making this worse.
Congresswoman, obviously we are very passionate people and we're working very hard to try to get something done on time. You were just saying that you think driving innovation should be front and center of any renewable energy agenda. Could we share with you more about what we've learned about how this growing global trend toward accountability for carbon emissions is actually creating opportunities? So here we get back to the question about size of teams. So the size of your team will vary from meeting to meeting. Um, so it is possible to have a meeting with just 2 or 3 volunteers and have people fill more than one role. Um, I would say that, 5 or 6 to 7 is a great number to have. If your team ends up being a larger group, it might mean that some folks don't have to speak other than maybe saying their name and a brief story. That is a brief personal story of introduction. And as the leader, you want to acknowledge and appreciate them for that, but maybe even explain to the staff person that we have extra constituents that have come that want to demonstrate how many people are concerned about this issue. But only some of us will be, participating directly in the meeting. So having additional people, looking pleasant and affirming, can also be helpful. So even if they don't say much, it can add to your meeting. So in a few meetings, we have experimented with support observers where a larger number, more like a town hall kind of feeling of CCL volunteers have been present on Zoom with their camera on and muted. In that case, when it was a really large group, they didn't even say their name, they just had it on their screen. But once in a while, that might be an appropriate way, depending on your member of Congress and if that is a message that you feel they need to hear or experience that you have a lot of support for this. And you may also run into a situation where only minutes ahead of your meeting, one of your team members texts you to say they're going to be late. So coming in late has the chance to significantly disrupt a meeting, especially when it's on Zoom and suddenly a new person appears. So as a result, you should be clear with your team ahead of time that the only time you would want a team member to join a meeting that's already in progress is if they're the only constituent. So otherwise, politely let your group know ahead of time that coming in late would disrupt the meeting, and so you would fill them in afterwards. For Zoom meetings, we recommend locking the room or enabling the waiting room still so that you can't have someone just pop in unexpectedly. And once in a while, that also then avoids any unplanned attendees showing up for an online meeting that they weren't scheduled in. That happens very rarely, but another way to avoid that is to either lock the meeting or to enable the waiting room. So if someone happens to come in, if you forgot that piece and someone shows up and you didn't mean to have them there, you can have your tech person remove them before they distract anyone from the meeting. And you don't have to provide an explanation for it. Given how much time and coordination has been put into scheduling and planning, it's key that your group feels empowered to do whatever it takes to keep your meeting focused and on track and with just the attendees that you were planning to have join the meeting. So for most online meeting platforms, in addition to Zoom, you can have that waiting room or a similar feature enabled so that you know who's coming in at what time. And then after the meeting, here's what you should do immediately after. And ideally, you can just wait until the staff person has signed off and keep your team on the same Zoom line to do a debrief right away. So the note taker can then review what they have in the notes and just let anyone else add if they've captured something additional. Have people share what went well, what could be improved. Confirm the responsibilities for who's going to do follow-up, who will file the meeting notes, who will email the liaison if they weren't in the meeting, and who will send any follow-up materials to the staffer or the member of Congress. And then also determine who will send the thank you note via email. So a few days later, as the meeting lead, you should confirm that that each person said they have done a follow-up task has actually done so. And then one last thing, this is a special request for this particular lobby event because we have such a short time frame that we're trying to get permitting reform pushed through. We would like to get immediate feedback on how your meeting went and where you would rank your member of Congress in their support for the energy permitting reform bill. So to make this easy, we've created a Google form that, and I've got a short link there to make it easy to find that form. It's also in the sample outlines for the meeting agenda and roles. So that's another place where you'll see the link. And if you can't find the link, feel free to just email the liaison coordinator that goes to me with your ranking of that member. But this is really helpful to our government affairs team to have this particular ranking right after our meetings.
All right, so we still have 5 minutes for questions. We just wanted to do two last other procedural reviews, one of which is where, again, you can find your lobby meetings afterwards. That form that Mindy referenced is not actually where to submit your meeting minutes or the notes that you've taken. That instead is under the action tracker. Most people here as leads know where that is, but I put a link to it in the chat. If you need to find it, it should also be available under the drop-down menu on your home. And the key thing that we want to focus on, again, in your note taking, we have a whole training just on how to take great notes. But really, it's feedback that you're getting from the member or the staffer as kind of the key areas. You can always just email liaison coordinator, which is staffed generously by Mindy, if you have any other questions on that front. But again, you can see in the action track, you click on contact legislator and then lobby meeting, and that should be able to kind of read you right into being able to submit your notes. And the last thing I just want to ground you all in is just like our Vice President of Government Affairs, Ben Prendergast, featured here on this last slide, likes to remind us we as constituents are more powerful than we often realize and remember. Our voices truly matter to Congress. So make sure that as you are going into these meetings, you help your team really feel that sense of power, that sense of empowerment, and that you're really able to bring out in Congress a collective focus that they might not be able to achieve without the collective efforts of CCLers. We want to walk out with specific actions that we're taking with our members of Congress, keep asking open-ended questions till we get what we need. We want to make sure to keep emphasize listening so that we can understand where they are at. You're there to help others shine as the leaders and build that collective power for everyone to build up their skills and knowledge, especially having the chance to really highlight the importance of how you can feel good about as a team you move forward climate policy with the office. And lastly, if anyone does have any questions after tonight, thank you again so much, Mindy, for making yourself available. I'll put Mindy's email and update this slide actually as well. So you can find the liaison coordinator email one last time, as well as our CCL community forums, or anyone that has questions can make sure to get their answers addressed.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration.
Like what you hear? Recommend us to your friends and make sure to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us show up on other listeners' feeds. Feel free to pass on any suggestions for future episodes in the comments as well.
And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.